Hey there, it's Steve from Serious Keto, and this is the Not So Serious Keto video podcast. Now, if you hear any sort of humming or buzzing in the background, likely that is either the furnace or the base wall heaters here in the man cave, because it is currently, this afternoon, minus 5 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is about minus 22 Celsius here in southeast Wisconsin. I'll probably talk a little bit more about that at the end of the podcast. Also, if you are watching this podcast on Monday, the 15th of January, I will be on Dr. Ken Berry's Proper Human Diet live stream this afternoon at 4 p.m. Central. So if you are a member of the Proper Human Diet group, make sure to tune in for that. If you're not a member of the Proper Human Diet user group, that video interview will be on YouTube eventually, hopefully sooner rather than later, and also hopefully on Dr. Berry's channel rather than mine, because it'll get a lot more views that way. Now, the first topic I want to cover in today's podcast is a big one. In fact, it's probably going to take up the entire first half of the podcast. So before I get into that, I want to let you know that this podcast is brought to you in part by porkrinds.com. Now, my whole family has been a big fan of everything that we've tried out. All of the pork rinds from porkrinds.com. That is really awesome.
Yeah. Good.
Those are really yummy. But the one thing that just thrills me about all of these is just how light the texture is. As well as their fried home pork rinds, which my grandson absolutely loves. Now, grab these guys. Another thing that I love about porkrinds.com is they list the fat that is used in whatever products they're making. And if you're a stickler for that, you can go into the shop section, then scroll down on the left-hand side, you'll see a group or a little button you can click on that says fried in lard. And there you see all of their products fried in lard, from their cracklins, and I really want to try out that sampler pack, all the original Southern recipe flavors, the Pop at Home pork rinds, which I talked about earlier, Pepe's chicharrones, and the croutons salad toppers. Now, if you use the link down in the description below, along with the code SeriousKeto, you can get 15% off your purchase, and any order over $45 is free shipping. So check it out. Like I said, link down below in the description. The first topic that I want to cover today is keto fraud. Now, there's a little bit of history in this, so I'm going to take you back, and I'm actually going to have to read some printed out emails that I have here. But back in 22, one of my viewers, thank you, Linda, sent me a great big gift box of baked goods from a local keto bakery. This bakery is in League City, Texas. So it's a suburb of Houston, just to the southeast of Houston. And she sent me this massive box of goodies with buns and muffins and croissants. I was just overwhelmed. She said it was a birthday gift, sort of a belated birthday gift. And the first thing I tried out was the croissant. And here is the email reply that I sent to Linda. Linda, I'm wondering if they shipped me real croissants instead of keto croissants. They tasted like real croissants and gave me a 48-point spike in blood glucose. It sure was delicious, though. Have you done any glucose testing when eating them? Now, they pack in a list of nutritional information for all of their products, along with lists of all the ingredients. And I haven't done a tremendous amount of keto baking, but I've done enough that I can look at a list of ingredients and say, is this gonna work out as bread or a bun or something like that? And in fact, when I did the video interview of Alicia from Keto Upgrade, and she's an expert baker, I ran the list of ingredients by her just to kind of double check and see if I was misunderstanding anything. And she said, no, there's absolutely no way you can make bread out of that. And back to the croissant, I have not seen any keto product, any keto recipe that can truly emulate a croissant properly, you know, with all the concentric flaky layers. I mean, these basically, if you gave me one of these from this bakery, and it's called Marina's Bakery, and you gave me a croissant from Costco, you know, those big jumbo containers that my wife buys, I don't think I would be able to tell the difference. So I figured either there's something fishy going on, or these people know some sort of magic baking voodoo that is completely undiscovered yet by the rest of the keto community. Anyhow, let me move on. The next thing I tried out was one of the blueberry muffins. Here's my email to Linda. I'm still working my way through the baked goods you sent me. I'm also kind of wondering if perhaps I was sent some non-keto goods by accident. I tried the blueberry muffin, which was amazing. The taste and texture were indistinguishable from a non-keto muffin. Then I did a blood glucose test and about fainted when my blood glucose registered 183. It is the single biggest spike I have ever recorded since I started testing. I don't think I've ever tested any keto product, or even in my resistant starch tests when I was doing like a straight up baked potato, I don't think I ever scored that high. I mean, it was almost a 100-point spike in glucose. So at this point, I thanked Linda. I said, I really, really appreciate the thought of sending this to me. I'm sure it was at no small expense to her, but I can't continue to eat these things. So I gave them to my wife and son and daughter, and they ate them. And I was really kind of conflicted about what should be my role in all of this. If this were a local bakery, if this were some bakery and I'd purchased this stuff in southeast Wisconsin, I would have considered this my fight. I would have gotten the product, gotten some more. I would have maybe spoken to the owner, and if I met some resistance, I probably would have had the product taken and tested by an independent lab. But, you know, this is down in Texas. It was not my fight to fight. So I just sort of stepped aside and, you know, I gave my opinion to Linda and hoped that someone else would take over this fight for me, someone local. So I got an email just this week from Linda explaining that someone did, in fact, take on this fight. And I will include a link down below in the description to the Facebook article about it, but I'm going to read it to you right now. I'm going to do my best to read this without stumbling over my words, and we'll see how that goes. The headline is, Marina's Bakery in League City is not keto or gluten-free. For the past several years, James Gahan and Johnny Montgomery, co-owners of J&J Creations, DBA Marina's Bakery and Events, have been lying to the public about the ingredients in their bread products. They claim their products are keto and or gluten-free, derived from James' own recipe creations, and list the alleged ingredients and macros on a sheet of paper they hand out to new customers or may post on the wall. After spending thousands of dollars at Marina's thinking we were buying keto goods but seeing adverse effects, and then hearing stories from others who were experiencing the same, I decided to research Marina's and their alleged products. I began by having a few items tested. I purchased the blueberry muffins, salted pretzels, and a loaf of bread. I have photos of the receipt and purchased items. Those are shown also on the Facebook page. I then sent samples of each to Anresco Labs in California, requesting each be tested for nutrient components. I also added photo documentation of this as well. I really wanted the testing to prove my suspicions wrong, but the results confirmed the products were not keto. Marina's bread loaf had 22.79 grams of carbs and 117.99 calories per slice. Marina's states 4.8 grams of carbs and 37 calories per slice. Marina's bread had more carbs and calories than bread at a grocery store. Marina's blueberry muffin, which is the one I tried, 70.94 grams of carbs and a whopping 568.81 calories per muffin. There is 33.87 grams of sugar, contrary to James's statements that the muffins have no added sugars. Marina's claim is that a muffin has 8 grams of carbs and 110 grams of calories. So that would explain the massive glucose spike I experienced. The author of this article then goes into some details about some detective work about where these products were actually baked and manufactured, so I'm not going to read through all of that. So here's the final paragraph. I and several other people have reported this to the Texas Attorney General's Office of Consumer Protection and to the Food and Drug Administration. While I have a case number and advised they are or will investigate, I've grown tired of waiting for the government to act, which is why I decided to publicly post my findings. Now, subsequent to this, Marina's Bakery, I guess, has shut down, and that's all I know. But the moral of this story is commercial keto products do your own glucose testing. This is the reason why I test so many keto or supposedly keto or low-carb products. Products that claim to be keto-friendly, products that claim to have zero net carbs. There is a lot of gamesmanship, I think, out there. I mean, this particular instance is legitimate fraud. This isn't just playing around with what's resistant starch and what isn't, what's fiber, what isn't. This is flat out fraud right here. But again, this is why I test products on this channel. And I also encourage you to do the same, because my metrics, my measurements of glucose and ketones and how things affect me are only an indication of how they affect me, not necessarily how they will affect you. And sort of my disclaimer on this whenever I do testing is, if it doesn't affect me, it may or may not affect you. But if it does affect my glucose, if I see a big spike, and I'm pretty metabolically flexible, if I see a big spike, then that's a big red flag. But regardless, I really encourage anybody that's doing keto, especially if you are eating any sort of commercial, supposedly keto, and it may be keto, products, test your blood glucose. Now, I generally wear a continuous glucose monitor. I do it through the Levels Health program. It's not cheap. I'll link to it down in the description below if you're curious about it, but a continuous glucose monitor is absolutely the way to go if you want to measure your metabolic health, but like I said, not cheap. I also will frequently use a Keto Mojo. It's both a ketone and glucose monitor. It's on the high end in terms of price and in terms of the cost of the strips that you use, but you can get an inexpensive glucose monitor out on Amazon. I'll link to whatever one I find that's got the highest reviews and lowest price down in the description below. I truly encourage you to do your own testing. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about testing after this brief ad break. I just realized that I didn't have my little background light running that kind of makes me pop a little bit more on the video. I didn't have that running the first half, so I'm going to turn that on right now. You're kind of seeing behind the scenes here how this all works. That's what I'm talking about right there. Now, to continue with the topic of glucose testing, periodically I will have people share their testing results with me, whether it's on the resistant starch or supposedly resistant starch videos, or whether it's on some keto product, bread, tortilla, whatever. And I appreciate that. I love it when people share their results. More data points, better. The problem is the way some people choose to measure, and furthermore then argue with me about the way they choose to measure. So people will measure, they'll measure a baseline before they start eating. They'll do a finger prick and they'll draw up the blood and they'll test it. And then they measure again 2 hours later and they'll see virtually no movement. And they'll say, hooray, I can eat this. I don't know why it spiked you. It's fine for me. The problem is, and I don't know who told people those were the times to measure. I think those are 2 of the times to measure, but they're missing, in my opinion, the most important time, which is right about 1 hour. Every single blood glucose or continuous glucose measurement I've ever done on any product, when it spikes right around an hour. So if you test before, that's good. So you get your baseline, and you test after 2 hours. That's also good, because if you're still elevated and haven't returned to baseline, that's sort of a problem. But really, as a measurement of metabolic health, you not only want to know how long your glucose was elevated, but also how big the spike was. And you're missing out on that if you're not measuring at 1 hour. And I had one viewer just rabidly argue with me that that didn't matter. But it does. It does matter, because as you're spiking your glucose, you are then going to cause this injection or infusion of insulin in your body. And as you do this repeatedly, you start to become insulin resistant and may develop type 2 diabetes. So we want to measure at that 1 hour mark. And I tried every way to politely explain to this viewer the reason for that. It's sort of like if you're driving 2 miles and you measure your speed at at the start and you measure your speed at the end, but you don't measure it at all in between. And there's a cop sitting right at the 1 mile marker with a radar, and they clock you speeding. And you say, but officer, I wasn't speeding. I measured myself at mile 0 and at mile 2. That's essentially what you're doing if you're not measuring at 1 hour. So please, if you are testing out products, if you are checking your blood glucose, use that extra strip. Test at the 1 hour mark. I know it's no fun jabbing yourself with a lancet. And some people feel like, oh, well, I don't want to use an extra strip. What a waste. No, you're actually wasting 2 strips if you're not using that third, in my opinion. Now, here's a little tip, too, if you're using a lancet pen, and people don't believe me on this until they try it. The best place to use a lancet pen is right here between your cuticle and your first knuckle. Any finger is fine. Set the plunge depth to as shallow as it goes on your lancet pen, like a 1 or a 2. A 1 if it's a 5-position lancet, a 2 if it's a 10. You're not going to feel it. You will feel the click of the spring in the pen more than you feel the lancet. It works wonderfully, and it heals pretty much instantly. So, free tip from me on blood glucose testing right there. And like I said before, if you ever do any testing on any of the products that I use, by all means, I want you to feel comfortable posting your results in the comments. One of the topics that I covered a couple of weeks ago, just briefly, was LDL and supplements that can reduce LDL cholesterol. And the reason I brought this up, I think some people maybe were a little bit confused. I don't have a huge concern about LDL. And in fact, based on some recent research and videos that I've watched, which I'll talk about in a second, now I care even less about LDL. The main thing I wanted to do, though, was avoid any sort of statin conversation with my general practitioner or primary care physician. Both of the last 2 years, my primary care physician has tried to put me on a statin, and I've said no. So 2 years ago, I insisted that he give me a coronary artery calcium. I think that's what it is. It's a CAC is what it's called. It's a CT scan, and they look at how much calcium you have around your heart or something like that. Yeah, I'm pretty scientific. Anyhow, my score was a 3. I don't know how high the scale goes. I guess it goes really, really high. But 3, anything below 10 is essentially nothing. And it's probably, I would say in all likelihood, I scored those 3, that tiny, tiny little bit of calcification, in the first 51 years of my life pre-keto. Anyhow, he saw this score and said, all right, fine, you don't need to be on a statin. Well, the next year I came back and my cholesterol was actually lower. And again, he said, we'd like to put you on a statin. And I said, no. And he didn't actually say it. He had one of his nurses call me and say it. And I said no, and we got into a little bit of an argument about that because she said, well, oh my God, you're going to have a stroke in the next year if you don't get on a statin. Anyhow, my HDL is great. It's up in the optimal range. My triglycerides are wonderfully low. And my LDL is just marginally high. It's not a big deal. It's just marginally high. And by any reasonable person's standard, there should really be no need for me to be on a statin. But because I tend to be, I've got 2 modes, either non-confrontational or overly confrontational. And I don't know which of those is going to rear its head in my conversation with my doctor. So I thought, if I could just avoid this conversation by taking a few cholesterol-lowering supplements, just enough to get under whatever threshold he thinks is statin-worthy, then I wouldn't have to have this conversation. Now, subsequently to making that decision, and if I could, dial back time and not have purchased these supplements on Amazon, I would dial back in time and not have purchased these supplements on Amazon. That said, if they do in fact lower my LDL, I'll let you know, and I'll let you know what supplements they were, just in case you feel like taking them. But odds are, after you watch a couple of videos, you are not going to be all that interested in lowering your LDL. You're going to see that it's not a big deal. In fact, it's a pretty good thing for your brain, for your body, for your healing. And those 2 videos, one is Dr. Barry, and he had Dr. David Diamond on. It's an hour and 16-minute long video. And normally when someone sends me a video that's more than 12 minutes, I just say, not happening. This is an hour and 16 minutes that is very much worth your time. There are a few audio issues on the podcast or the interview, but very good stuff. And then there's another one, a far shorter one with Dr. Paul Saladino, I think that's how you pronounce his name, that he does just a remarkable job explaining it. And between the two, the Dr. Berry and Dr. Diamond, they talk about the Jupiter study, which is one of the ones that so much of this statin proof is based on. And it really does a spectacular job debunking that. Now, being someone that used to be sort of a statistical analytics guru and instructor, I loved the breakdown that Dr. Diamond did, explaining the difference between relative and absolute data. And you see just what an insignificant impact statins actually have, especially in light of their multitude of side effects. The other big study is I think it's the Framingham risk study. I may be getting the name wrong. Framingham is the right part, but Saladino covers this in that other video, and he explains that, you look at the graph where it's just, you've got along the x-axis is LDL, and along the y-axis is risk of heart attack, and of course you see the number, the arrow just go up. As you increase LDL, so do you also increase the risk of a heart attack. But that's just really showing association, not necessarily causation. Very often, when we find in doing statistical analytics that there is a third variable that just happens to be influencing things that is not taken into account. And Saladino explains, and it would have been great if he would have had a graph of it, but he took the cohort and stratified it by HDL. So the higher your HDL, generally the lower your insulin, the more metabolically healthy you are. And then the lower your HDL typically is an indicator of higher insulin. Like if you're a diabetic or a type 2 diabetic, odds are you have lower HDL. So he stratified this by, I think, low HDL, medium HDL, high HDL, and super high HDL, or something like that. And what you find is once you get into regular and especially higher levels of HDL, that line for LDL versus heart attacks is almost flat. If you have low HDL, yep, still's got that big upward slope. But if you are metabolically healthy and on a low-carb diet, according to these articles, there is essentially no concern at all over LDL. And as I said, I will link to all these. I'll link to the two videos as well as an article about low-carb diets and LDL down in the description below. Excellent reading. I encourage you all to take a look at that if you have any concerns about LDL or potentially having a statin conversation with your doctor. Now, my physical is going to be next Monday, so in 2 podcasts from now, I will let you know how that discussion went. Now that's about it for this podcast. I did mention the weather before. It has been a pretty mild winter so far here in southeast Wisconsin. No snow, which I love because just clearing snow. Even though I've got a snowblower, I've got a corner lot, and although it's not a huge lot, just by the shape of it, I've got a lot of sidewalk to cover. It takes, on a good day, an hour for me to clear snow. And on a bad day, like we had recently, a lot more than that. So we just got 14 inches of snow, and that involved me basically going out and blowing snow for about 6 to 8 hours cumulatively over about a 36-hour period. And because I'm a nice guy, I also take care of a couple neighbors on either side. I get their sidewalk. Anyway, I'm not going to do their driveway. That's their problem. But I take care of their sidewalks for them. And now we're going to have a period where for the next several days, the daily high is not going to get above 0 Fahrenheit. So I don't expect that I'm going to be going outside on any errands or dates or anything like that over the next handful of days. I'll probably mostly be working on recipes or hunkered down here in the man cave. But that is going to be it for this podcast. As always, I really enjoy the time that we get to spend together every week. I enjoy your comments down below, so if there's something on your mind, feel free to let me know down below. And with that, as always, thanks for listening, and thanks for watching.